Now, I have the honor to introduce Dr. Mark Sargent, the Westmont Provost, and he in return will introduce our speaker. Dr. Mark Sargent assumed the role of Provost at Westmont College during the spring of 2012. A graduate of UC Santa Barbara, he earned his master's degree and doctorate in English at the Claremont Graduate University, specializing in American literature. He taught as a Fulbright Scholar at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands and has written widely on history, literature, film, and higher education. He has had a long and distinguished career in higher education and came to Westmont after 16 years as provost at Gordon College in Massachusetts. Westmont was not new to the family, for his wife and one of his sons graduated from Westmont, and his daughter is a current student. Is she still a current student?
Yes, sure.
She sure is. Is she a senior?
She's in Spain.
But is she a senior?
She's a junior.
Okay. This is, come speak. Thank you very much, Dr. Sargent.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your good words, and thanks for coming out tonight. It's great to see a large standing room only crowd for mathematics. I'm honored to be able to introduce to you Dr. Russell Howell as our special lecturer this evening. Dr. Howell completed his undergraduate degree at Wheaton College in Illinois and finished his master's degree in computer science at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. He earned his doctorate from the Ohio State University. Yeah. Although that looks like a Michigan blue tie, but I won't. we won't go there. He joined the mathematics faculty of Westmont College in 1978 and has twice been named the Teacher of the Year. His teaching extends beyond the college classroom. In addition to many professional workshops and seminars, he has been the primary leader and developer of a high school mathematics contest that has been held at Westmont for the last 27 years. And in honor of that, I actually wore the T-shirt for the high school competition. That you get these if you win, right? Oh, if you participate. That's why I got it. This is a Menger square. Did I get that right? Sponge, Menger sponge. And he'll explain what that means later at some point. One of the many reasons that we have selected him to give a Westmont downtown lecture this year is that during this academic year, he was installed in the Kathleen Smith Chair of Natural and Behavioral Sciences at Westmont. This is an honor that salutes a lifetime of excellence in teaching, scholarship, and service to the Academy, to his church, and to the Westmont community. As a scholar, Dr. Howell focuses on complex analysis, and he recently received a large grant from the National Science Foundation to pursue curriculum reform on the subject at the undergraduate level. He is the co-author of a book, Complex Analysis for Mathematics and Engineering, which is in its 6th edition, as well as co-editor of the book Mathematics Through the Eyes of Faith, as well as the co-editor of the book Mathematics in a Postmodern Age, A Christian Perspective. His love of the liberal arts is apparent in his wide intellectual scope, as you can see in his publications, which appear not only in mathematical journals, but in a top journal in the New Testament and in Christian Scholars Review. During the past couple of years, Russ has been elected chair of the Academic Senate at Westmont, which is the primary curriculum committee for the faculty. I have truly enjoyed working with him in this role. He's collegial and respectful, and yet candid and transparent. He's both philosophical and pragmatic. In the consideration of any issue related to the curriculum, he can reflect on the larger principles at play, as well as the consequences of any action for his colleagues and the students, and still keep his focus on the steps that will resolve the issue and move matters forward. Russ enjoys playing tennis. I think he's recuperating a little bit from a recent injury. Playing the piano, hiking with his wife, Kay, and playing with his yellow lab named Dickens. So let me simply say that I always have great expectations when Russ comes to speak. Please welcome Dr. Russ Howell.
Thank you, Mark. That was a fabulous introduction, and thanks to the Westmont Foundation for inviting me to come. It's a privilege to be here. And thank you all for coming. It's an honor to be exposed to so many people brave enough to come to a talk that has the title Mathematical in it. You know, there's a philosopher or scientist named Auguste Comte who is considered to be the founder of sociology. And he's also known for a proponent of what he called the law of three stages, which he said that all societies progress through. The theological, the metaphysical, and the scientific. He also applied that to all disciplines. His theories have fallen out of favor among philosophers and sociologists, but yet within the mathematical community, there still is a theory of sorts, that there is a three-stage process for mathematical talks. The first one is hopefully informative, inspirational, and interesting. And usually everyone in the audience understands it. The second stage, unfortunately, is often deductive, dense, and dry. And sometimes only half the people in the audience understands. And then, sadly, there's often a third stage, theoretical, technical, and torturous. That's where no one in the audience understands. So let's hope that tonight I'm only able to make it through 1/3 of my talk. My talk, though, does have 3 parts, and we're in the introductory bit right now. And I've been asked to speak on mathematical algorithms. And for most of tonight, as you see, we'll be looking at 3 types: optimization, internet page ranks, and encryption systems. We'll close by looking at an interesting question suggested by the physicist Eugene Wigner. Why is mathematics so effective? What does the word algorithm mean? It comes from the Persian mathematician Abdul Jafar Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. He published a book, Al-Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab al-Jabar wal-Muqabala, which translates to Compendium on Calculation by Restoration and Reduction. The word al-Jabar literally means restoration. It involves getting negative numbers to the other side of the equation. See, in al-Khwarizmi's time, negative numbers were not part of the mathematical landscape. So this process was almost necessary. So you would take that equation and move the 18 that you see to the other side. While Muqabala refers to the process of canceling like terms. So you cancel the 2 x's from both sides of the equation, and also combining the 22 and 18. Now, how do you combine the 22 and the 18 to get 40? Well, you follow an algorithm. And the process, by the way, anyone here tell me what you think the modern equivalent of algebra is? Right, algebra. An algorithm was the Persian word, the Arabic word, that involved the process of doing arithmetic with Arabic numerals, the algorithm for adding 22 and 18. Now, gradually, algorithm morphed to algorithm. So what does it mean today? What does that word mean today? Good definition is an algorithm is a finite, effective list of instructions that are designed to accomplish a task. Now, by finite, you just mean that the list doesn't go on forever. Effective means 2 things. It means that the instructions are unambiguous, that they can be carried out, and also that they accomplish what they're supposed to do. So let's take a quick look at a quick example. There's a standard algorithm in computer science that sorts things, either numbers or names or words, called bubble sort. And it proceeds as follows. You compare the first 2 numbers, in this case 23 and 17. First number is bigger than the second, switch them. Otherwise, leave the numbers unchanged. So in this case, what would we do? Switch. Then you go to the next numbers. Compare them. Well, in this case, you wouldn't switch. Then you go to the next numbers. You continue the process until the list ends. In this case, you would switch. At this stage, you're guaranteed that the biggest number is at the bottom of the list. Now you just repeat the process for as many times as there are numbers on the list. Go again, no switch, switch here. Go back to the top, no switch, switch, back to the top, switch, now you're done. It's called bubble algorithm because the smaller numbers eventually bubble up to the top. You might have noticed that the algorithm as illustrated is a little different from what I described when you say go through as many times as there are numbers on the list. At the first go around, the largest number is guaranteed to be at the bottom, so the next time through, you don't have to go through the entire list. Likewise for subsequent steps. There's an entire field of computer science that concerns itself with analyzing how efficient various algorithms are. And there are other algorithms besides this one that will sort numbers much more quickly. This algorithm has the property that if you were to increase the size of the list by a factor of 10, the time required to sort the numbers would essentially be increased by a factor of 100. That sounds like a staggering amount, but really that's no problem for modern high-speed computers, even with very large lists. There are other seemingly simple problems, though, that require obvious algorithms, but they work very poorly, even on the fastest computers. To illustrate, let's take a look at the traveling salesman problem. It's famous in the Guild of Computer Science. He has a list of cities to visit and wants to know the route he should take so as to minimize the cost. The obvious algorithm is simple enough. Examine the cost of each one and pick the one with the smallest cost. Easier said than done. With 10 cities, there are over 3.5 million possible routes to consider. But even a good desktop computer could find the minimum of that number in a flash. With 100 cities, though, the task gets more daunting. There are that many outcomes to consider. I don't even know how to pronounce that number. Rumor has it that it's even larger than the national debt. But to put things in perspective, there are less atoms in the universe than that number. If you had given the computer the traveling salesman problem with just 100 cities, set it and imagine the fastest computer possible with the fastest processor, set it on its task of finding the best route, and started it when the universe was created, it would not be close to finishing yet. Many people intuitively feel that a computer could perform any computation rather quickly, and that in any case, as technology increases and computers become faster, there is virtually no problem that would take a computer very long to solve. This example illustrates that that's not the case. There are some algorithms that, as their size increases, or some problems that, as their size increases, require an unreasonable amount of computer time to solve due to the increasingly number of exponentially increasing number of tasks that a computer might do. Now, my talk is from Main Street to Wall Street, so before looking at algorithms that get us out of this dilemma, let me give you a quick example where the traveling salesman problem actually arose in a business. It was a problem that required visiting literally about 1,000 cities. Several years ago, I was sent an email by someone who was working for Allied Electronics as a consultant. The company was looking for an optimization algorithm that would incorporate into its automated storage and retrieval system, known as ASRS, a way of getting the goods. As you can see, Allied sells lots of semiconductor components, which are stored in bins located in a huge warehouse. A typical order requires filling hundreds of bins, visiting hundreds of bins to get the components. The ASRS robot, in fulfilling an order, would have to retrieve the items from the bins. Now, in the business world, time is money. So the goal was to come up with the shortest route the robot could follow for any given order. As we've just learned, however, trying to look at the time involved for each possible routing scheme is infeasible. What to do? Given the complexity of this problem, computer scientists have come up with a couple of heuristic methods for solving it. The first is known as randomized deterministic descent. The second is called simulated annealing. Here's how randomized deterministic descent works. First, you randomly choose an ordering of the cities and compute the cost to visit them. Then you randomly pick two cities and interchange the order in which they are visited. Then you just ask this question: if the new cost is less than the old cost, go with the new itinerary. If the new cost is greater than the old cost, stay with the old itinerary. Keep doing that for several times until you see no reasonable improvement or until you've exceeded a predetermined number of steps. Combining the words randomized and deterministic is a bit oxymoronic. The randomization occurs in the selection of the cities to switch. The determinism comes because once selected, the outcome of what to do is completely specified. Let's illustrate how this algorithm works with Westmont College students. Where do they typically go during the day? Well, as you see, there are 5 possible locations. The dormitory, the dining commons, that's DC, a local pizza place, the beach, and of course, the library. Suppose the route that they chose were as listed. First the dorm, then the beach, then the DC, then the pizza, then the library. That looks not to be the most efficient route. Suppose this were given to a randomized deterministic descent algorithm. It might randomly select the beach and the DC as cities to interchange. Doing that would give you a new route. You see in the light blue the old route. The new one now is the dorm, the DC, the beach, the pizza, the library, and back to the dorm. As you can see, the new route is more efficient than the old one. The old one involves 2 crisscrosses, taking up more space. This one only involves 1 crisscross. Suppose now that the algorithm randomly chose the beach and the pizza parlor to interchange. That would result in this new route with this outcome. It seems that it's optimal. I say seems that it's optimal because I checked with our student development office and asked if they would do a survey to find out how students actually go. And believe it or not, they've actually come up with a more efficient route than this. Surprising as it seems. You start at the dorm, you go to the DC, and then, oh no, that's not quite right, is it? The following slides picture what the idea of this randomized deterministic descent algorithm is, but they also exhibit a potential hazard. By randomly comparing different routes, you're apt to get a reasonable good one sooner or later. Try that one, that looks good, it's lower cost. Try that one, that looks good, it's lower cost. If that one is the next step, you refuse it because it's higher cost. But as you see, you're apt to get trapped in a local minimum. Once you're there, no change will result in an accepted state because it's of higher cost. You won't find the global minimum. Simulated annealing is an algorithm designed to get around that difficulty. To help understand how it works, I need a couple of volunteers, and I have to get something from my little briefcase here. I'm wondering if the 2 of you would mind coming up. Are you brave enough? Kind of.
Purely red.
I have here a copper rod, and it looks dirty, but it's clean. And what I'd like you to do is take it and give it a, even though it's metal, I'd like you to bend it with all your might. See how you can do. Just bend it.
Yeah, that's been.
Keep bending, keep bending.
Oh, my word.
Okay, let me see if I can. Okay, there we go, right? Yeah? Now, sir, I'd like you to unbend it. Can't do it.
A little bit, but
A
not
little
much.
bit, but not much. Dr. Sargent, you're a big hefty man. You saw how easy it was to bend?
I don't know.
I'm in danger of losing my contract, I think. So. Okay, thank you very much. That was the demo. Now, what was going on there? The name simulated annealing, which we're going to, oh, by the way, I forgot to show this slide. Here's an example of deterministic descent applied to a bunch of cities who are marked with X's. And this is the result of the output. It looks like it's stuck at a local minimum. You can obviously see there's a more efficient route, but it can't find it. Interchanging any two cities would wind up with a higher cost. Now, how does simulated annealing work? It comes from a process known as annealing that takes place in the physical world. A metal, like copper, is heated and then gradually cooled to ensure thermal equilibrium. If done properly, the atoms will place themselves in a pattern that corresponds to the global energy that's minimized in a perfect crystal, making it easy to bend the metal. Now, I was hoping that it would be very easy to bend, but I guess I didn't heat it up quite enough. I just tried it again today, but you get the idea. If you do it right, it'll be as easy to bend like a rubber hose. Once bent, however, the alignment of the crystals is disrupted, and the metal is no longer easy to bend. The algorithm, simulated annealing, is identical to that for randomized deterministic annealing, except for one crucial step. It's this one that I'm just toggling back and forth in. If the new cost is greater than the old cost, randomly decide whether to keep the new itinerary based on a probability that decreases with time. The gradual lowering of the probability corresponds with the gradual lowering of temperature in the physical annealing process. You initially allow uphill steps. They are likely to be accepted because the probability is high. As time progresses, however, the acceptance of uphill states becomes less likely. This corresponds exactly to what you must do to properly anneal a metal piece. So let's compare the two methods. Whereas deterministic descent would not accept this proposed new state, simulated annealing may say yes. Let's try that one, and eventually we might arrive at the global minimum. That's the algorithmic world. It's a nice metaphor, but does it really work? Well, let's compare the two methods. Here's the result of applying deterministic descent to a bunch of cities scattered on a map that you see. With the same configuration, here's the result of simulated annealing. You see that it's done much better, a cost of $704 versus $557. Let's return a bit to the Allied electronics story. I referred the person that contacted me to a former student who had gone on to get his PhD in operations research. He put in a bid to develop a routing system for Allied Electronics and got the job. And he used simulated annealing successfully in a program that took an order of parts and mapped out an efficient route for the automated robot to use in retrieving them. That's nice, and what do you think? I've never yet gotten a dinner as a sort of referral fee. Now, there's a vast array of literature dealing with complex problems that have to be solved by simulated annealing. Here's just a few of them. Circuit partitioning and placement, computer chip design, strategy scheduling for capital products with complex product structure, and yes, umpire scheduling in professional tennis tournaments. The following slides show the result of applying simulated annealing to the problem of packing a bunch of randomly sized rectangles into as small an area as possible. Think, if you will, of arranging components on a circuit board so as to minimize the space that's taken up. Why not try out all possible arrangements? Well, it won't work. This is the result of the annealing process. You can see it's quite compact as opposed to the original statement. Trying all possible arrangements won't work because that's how many possible arrangements there are, with only 30 rectangles to consider. Engineers at IBM once used simulated annealing to work on a computer component placement problem involving hundreds of parts. They had spent many months coming up with what they thought was an optimal configuration. They turned the problem over to simulated annealing, and it produced an output that was roughly 10% better. What about capital products or umpire scheduling? Each of these tasks requires sequencing. For capital products, it means figuring out the best ordering of tasks to accomplish, much like what goes on in a program evaluation and review technique protocol. For a tennis match, there are various needs. For a serve line judge, baseline, center line, and so forth. Furthermore, each umpire is ranked 1, which is best, to 7. And they must be sequenced to rotate at certain intervals in a given match, and also for different matches throughout the tournament. The sequencing that gives the best overall performance is accomplished by annealing, as the slide you're now looking at depicts. There's some heavy-duty mathematics that goes into the analysis of simulated annealing. In general, every single problem requires separate analysis. Here's a section from this umpire paper. It's very tempting to dive into the details, but I'm afraid that in doing so, I'll be transitioning into the second stage of my talk. So let's instead move on to another example. A Westmont grad from 1996 went on to do computer graduate work in computer science, and after earning his master's degree, he phoned one day to say that he would not be continuing for the PhD. But instead, he would be taking a job with a startup company in the Bay Area. I asked him to reconsider on 3 points. Number 1, he was capable of getting the PhD. Number 2, doing so would expand his horizons and increase opportunities. And number 3, well, you know, taking a job with a startup company is risky business. He agreed to think about it, but 1 week later phoned back and said he was a bit tired of the academic world and wanted to move on. He was the 18th person hired by that company, which now has the name Google. Boy, does he regret taking my advice. In the 1990s, there were a variety of search engines on the internet, but entering a query did not necessarily yield the best results. Prospective college students at the time would do an internet search to get information on a college they were considering. Most of the time, though, the output they got was only indirectly related to what they wanted. It would contain maybe links to things like clubs associated with those institutions, and not the institution's main page, if indeed the institution even had a main page. Today, of course, that would not likely happen, thanks in part to Brin and Page, co-founders of Google. In fact, Pagerank is the algorithm used by Google in web searches. It's named after Larry Page. Before I describe how Pagerank works, let's take a look at what happens in a typical web search. First, a text query is sent by a user and passed on to Google's server. What it does is it extrapolates the relevant words, which are in turn passed to an index server. The index server contains a massive number of links to web pages that actually contain those terms. The links are then sent to a document server, which retrieves the actual content of the corresponding pages. Finally, just before Google displays anything, the pages are sorted so that the most relevant pages are at the top of the list. Much of that process is proprietary, but a key player in the last step is the PageRank algorithm. The idea behind PageRank can best be explained by an analogy to endorsements. Before I show you this, I'm going to blank the screen. When I was in the Army, my last year I was stationed in South Korea, and I applied for a teaching position at Westmont, which at the time required 7 recommendations. Must admit I had trouble thinking of 7 people that might say something nice about me. But besides my academic references, I needed one more, and finally thought, I know what I'll do. I'll ask the 3-star general whom I know, who's in charge of the combined headquarters in which I was serving, to write a reference letter. Now, why did I pick a 3-star general? Well, because he's famous. And a recommendation from a famous person might carry more weight. Well, does that strategy work? Well, I got the job. A similar philosophy is embedded in Google's PageRank algorithm. A link from page A to page B can sort of be thought of as an endorsement by page B of page A. Did I say that the right way? Yeah. A link is from A to B. So now page B gets endorsed by page A. Yeah, I think I said that right. The more endorsements a page has, that is, the more incoming links it has, the more important it is deemed to be. PageRank takes this into account. But what if an important person is known for freely handing out endorsements? What if the general I mentioned was widely known for saying good things about anyone, even those who have been proven to be incompetent? An endorsement from that person would not be worth as much as an endorsement from an equally important person who is more discriminating. These ideas, too, PageRank takes into account. This all seems a bit circular. According to PageRank, a web page is important precisely when it is endorsed by other important pages. But how do you determine the importance of any page ranking in the first place? Although the task may seem impossible, there's actually a nice mathematical algorithm that lets you know how to do it. Let's see how by considering a very simple web example with just 4 web pages. As you can see, both page 1 is endorsed with the arrow pointing to it by both pages 3 and 4, so that its rank should reflect that fact. We could express these ratings mathematically. R1 equals R3 plus R4, meaning the rank of page 1 is equal to the rank of page 3 plus the rank of page 4. But that's misleading. Whatever the ranks of pages 3 and 4 are, the rank of page 4, page 4 is more liberal with endorsements. You know that it's endorsed 2 things, page 3 and page 1, whereas page 3 is more discriminating. It's only endorsed page 1. This should be reflected, and it is, by this method. Instead of R1, R3 plus R4, it's R3 over 1, because it's had 1 endorsement, plus R4 over 2. The 2 endorsements lowered its significance. You can do this for all the other pages. Page 2 is just endorsed by page 1, but on the other hand, page 1 endorses 3 pages. Page 3 is endorsed by pages 1, 2, and 4 with their respective weights. And finally, page 4. Now, mathematicians recognize this as solving 4 equations with 4 unknowns, and there's a matrix procedure for doing so. When you go through the solution, you get the ranks. R1 is 12, R2 is 4, and so on. In other words, page 1 is ranked first, page 3 is ranked second, 4 third, and page 2 fourth. Normally, this is normalized by dividing by the total number of rankings that there are. So you can think of those numbers as a probability. The probability that a random surfer, when given the choice of pages that Google produce, would go to any specific page. 38 or 39% for the first page, and so on. The notion of ranking by popularity is an intriguing idea. But it's had some negative yet amusing consequences, one of which is known as a Google bomb. It occurs when one or more people band together to create thousands of web pages with word links to point to a particular page of interest. This strategy results in an increased rank on that page when queried with specified selection of words. Let me give you an example. Suppose you wanted to open an ice cream parlor, and then you hire a computer programmer to create thousands of web pages with words in them like delicious ice cream, vanilla, yogurt. And to every one of those words, you create a link to the business you're setting up. That would, in a Google search, now someone goes into Google and types in ice cream. Your page is now more likely to get a higher rank than someone who didn't employ that strategy. Why? Well, even though the pages linking to it are not necessarily that important, there are thousands of them endorsing your particular page. Google Bomb was used during the presidency of George W. Bush. When you typed in the word miserable failure, this was the first link. A bunch of savvy Democrats had gotten together, created a bunch of web pages, and had them all with the words miserable failure linked to President Bush's biography. The Democrats caught on a little later, and they tried to make up, so eventually the second web page produced a link to michaelmoore.com. This strategy goes on. If you type in a web search miserable failure to Yahoo, you see that the Republicans outdid the Democrats. First was President Barack Obama, followed by the biography of President Bush. Now, Google has developed means for dealing with that kind of thing. But the game still goes on. Just 2 days ago, I typed in the word on Google completely, or the phrase, completely wrong. And the very first thing that came up was a picture of Mitt Romney. So it looks like the Democrats at least are still active. Now, before I put this topic to bed, I should mention that the web page example of 4 pages that we looked at indeed yields a unique solution for the rankings. But with hundreds of thousands of pages, such an outcome is not guaranteed to occur. One such instance would be when there's a web page with no outlinks at all. Another would be when there are clusters of pages with no links between them. There's been lots of mathematics written about what to do in situations like these, and Google implements it. It involves concepts from linear algebra, such as eigenvalues, eigenvectors, column stochastic matrices, and the Perron-Frobenius theorem. If we had more time, it would be fun to go into those, but we're going to move on. I'm not sure whether you perceive the algorithms we covered as being in the Main Street or Wall Street category, but the last one we'll look at today definitely belongs to both. It's known in the guild as RSA encryption. Something like it is used whenever you enter a PIN into an ATM machine to get cash, and also when the Federal Reserve engages in secure transactions over the internet. It's a complicated algorithm. I don't want you to worry about the details of the mathematics. I'm going to put up some numbers here. Just try and get the main flow. As a preliminary, you choose very large prime numbers, 2 of them. These primes are typically hundreds of digits long, but just for the sake of illustration, we'll say 61 for P and 53 for Q. Next, you compute the product, P times Q. In our case, we get 3,233. Then you compute P minus 1 times Q minus 1. For our case, we get 3,210. Then you choose a number E so that it has no common factors with P minus 1 times Q minus 1. We're going to pick 17. Then you calculate a number D so that D times E minus 1 is a multiple of N, 3,233. The number D, 2,753, works in this case, and you'll just have to take my word for it. It is very easy to calculate if you know what P and Q are. But It is very difficult to calculate if you don't know what P and Q are. Then you let the world know what E and N are, but you keep the number D to your secret to yourself. So here's what decryption looks at. Suppose your PIN number is 110. You compute a number X, which is 110 raised to the E power that you calculated, that you chose earlier, 17. That gives you that number, however you pronounce it. Then to decode, that's what you send over the internet. When you type in your ATM, this is what goes to the bank, that number. To decode it, you calculate first the number you get raised to the Dth power, to the 2,753rd power. That gives you an enormous number. I couldn't fit it on the screen. The times 10 to the 95,000 means there are 95,000 zeros after that number. It's so large you can hardly fathom it. And then you find a number z between 0 and n, so that x to the d minus z is a multiple of n. Again, if you know what P and Q are, this is easy to do, but it's impossible virtually to do if you don't. The number z is going to equal the original number of 110. Now there are theoretical constructs that go along that. I see, besides misspelling the word component, C-P-M-O-P-O-N-T. The theoretical component is known as Euler's theorem. I'll just read it as a mathematician would. If n and a are positive integers with greatest common divisor 1, then a raised to the Euler phi function is congruent to the Euler phi function is congruent to 1 mod n. I'm not going to go further than that. There's also a very practical component. It takes a very long time for a computer to find factors of large numbers. In other words, if P and Q are very large prime numbers, and you let a computer know what the product P times Q is, it would take a very long time for the computer to find the factors P and Q. RSA Incorporated, and RSA Laboratories, in order to encourage research into encryption processes, published a list of such products. And they offered cash prizes to anyone who could come up with their factors. That was in 1991. The challenge ended in 2007, but work continues on the list. In 2009, a team of researchers were able to factor this number, which is dubbed RSA 768. There's the products of the two numbers. It took the effort of hundreds of computers working over a period of 2 years to get that factorization. Most of the products that were published by RSA Laboratories have not yet been factored. That just shows you how difficult that problem is. Now, there are various tweaks that have been put into place to make RSA encryption more secure, but they are highly theoretical, and I'm not going to get into any further detail. Instead, I'll finish my talk briefly by examining an interesting meta question about mathematics that the algorithms we have been looking at sort of generate. Why is it that mathematics is so effective? The question was first raised in 1960 by the physicist and eventual laureate Eugene Wigner when he published an essay entitled "The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences." He worked in the quantum world and was baffled that mathematical theories, which are generated mostly out of human aesthetic considerations, would prove to be so successful in explaining the universe. In his paper, he states, "The enormous usefulness of mathematics and in the natural sciences is something bordering on the mysterious, and there is no rational explanation for it." What aesthetic principles are involved in mathematical theory formation? An important one is elegance. It's hard to explain what one means by an elegant theory without being immersed in the guild. But let me try and give you an example that might help elucidate. Let's suppose that 284 people are going to enter a single elimination tennis tournament, and that each match will be played with a new can of tennis balls. How many tennis balls would be required to be purchased ahead of time to conduct this tournament? Now, there are two ways to solve this problem. The first is to group 284 people into 142 pairs and have each pair play the first round. That would require 142 cans of tennis balls. The next round will require 142 over 2, 71 cans of tennis balls. But now we've got a problem. There are an odd number of people. So we have one person sit out who will have a bye, and in the next round, there will only be 70 players, requiring 35 tennis balls. Now that person that has the bye comes in, so that makes 36 players. Now we'll need 18 tennis balls, then 9 for the next round. But now one person has to sit out again. Then 4 with one person still sitting out, 2 and 1. Finally, that sitting out person comes back for round 9, and that's the total number of balls we'll need to conduct the tournament. If you add all those numbers up, you get 283, a very inelegant solution. Here's an elegant solution. With 284 entries in the tournament, there will eventually be 283 losers. After each match is played, give the can of tennis balls to the loser as a booby prize. You'll therefore need a total of 283 cans of tennis balls. G.H. Hardy developed several theories of what constitutes good, meaningful mathematics in his book, A Mathematician's Apology. And here are some of his criteria: elegance, economy of expression, depth, unexpectedness, inevitability, and seriousness. When you think about it, those are also qualities of a good poem. Now, 2 of those qualities, unexpectedness and inevitability, seem paradoxical. How can something unexpected also be inevitable? But the answer lies in looking at a mathematical proof itself. In a mathematical proof, there are always some brilliant ideas that surface, much like a surprise move in a chess match. And when put in context, those beautiful ideas just become stunning. Yet at the end, the outcome is inevitable. Now, I don't know, Dr. Sargent, you might comment on this being in literature. Would you say the same thing happens in a poem? When you read through it, there are delightful nuances of phrase that contain surprises and delight the senses. But at the end, paradoxically, you go, yeah, it just sort of had to be that way. So every mathematician is really a poet in disguise. Hardy even bragged that the theories in which he engaged would never have any physical benefit. Ironically, the mathematical tools in his area, analytic number theory, are the very ingredients for RSA encryption. According to Brian Greene, physicists do the same thing. He comments in his book, The Elegant Universe, physicists tend to elevate symmetry principles to a place of prominence by putting them squarely on the pedestal of explanation. The constant successful application of mathematical theories born out of human aesthetic criteria caught the attention of Mark Steiner, a philosopher of mathematics who at the time was at Harvard when he produced a very technical book called The Applicability of Mathematics as a Philosophical Problem. It contains very technical examples, but Steiner recognizes in those examples that there are many failures in attempting to use mathematical theories to explain the universe, yet he thinks it's significant that as a grand strategy, the theories formed are based on aesthetic criteria, and yet they wind up being successful. It makes it look like the universe is user-friendly for humans. Why would human aesthetic criteria be successful in explaining how the universe works? Now, there's a lot of literature that's been written on that, but as a Christian theist, I find a very satisfactory explanation to that question. Human aesthetic values and their subsequent use in successful physical theories dovetail very nicely with a Judeo-Christian view that humans are created in the image of God. Whatever being in God's image exactly entails, it seems to include a rational and aesthetic capacity reflective of his that enables humans to admire and understand his creation. As C.S. Lewis observed in his book called Miracles, the disorderly or complex world, which we cannot endure to believe, is the disorderly or complex world he would not have endured to create. Such a comment is not meant by me to be put down dogmatically as a final definitive answer, but as a catalyst to invite dialogue with people having different perspectives. Perhaps such a conversation would be good fodder for another day, however, as the time for this talk has run its course. Furthermore, the issues that the last comment generates get quickly into very deep philosophical waters. And if I dove into them now, I'd worry about transitioning into a new stage of mathematical talks, Comte's fourth stage, which he himself did not see. Confused, convoluted, and contrived. Not even the speaker understands what he's talking about. So instead, I'll just end by wishing you a good evening, and thanks to all.